What is up, guys, and welcome to my ranking of the Indiana Jones film franchise. 5 movies from Raiders of the Lost Ark to the recently released Dial of Destiny, ranked worst to best. Now, I have reviewed every single one of these movies in depth, so as I get to each individual entry, I'll put a link up here if you want to check out my full-on review and get my more in-depth thoughts on all of these. But for this video's purposes, I'm just going to kind of summarize my thoughts quickly and discuss this franchise one last time. So, strap on the fedora and grab your whip, because here we go. Coming in at number 5 for me is a movie that is clearly the weakest installment in this franchise, while at the same time, I've never found it to be as bad as people make it out to be, and that's The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, there is still a lot of Spielberg, Indiana Jones magic here. I still think that Harrison Ford does an awesome job in the role. I like his relationship in the second half of the film as it kind of rekindles with Marion Ravenwood and he gets introduced to Mutt being his son and some of the comedic back and forth that they have as a quote-unquote family. I really like the narrative end that they give the character, where he finally marries Marion and embraces Mutt as his son and walks off into the sunset, a happy, optimistic man. And there are some action sequences in this movie that I still think are exciting, and they have a little bit of that older Indiana Jones comedic value to it, but without looking down on the character or poking fun at the character, just kind of embracing a new era of Indiana Jones in his 60s. But unfortunately, this is the movie that gave us the nuke the fridge moment. This is the movie that gave us the Shia LaBeouf Tarzan moment. This is the movie that decided to bring aliens and flying saucers into the Indiana Jones franchise. There are some absolutely ridiculous and mind-boggling sequences and creative choices here that just make you have a hard time believing that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were the ones that put this movie together. The guys that gave us the original trilogy thought that this stuff was a great idea. So it's a movie that I get some entertainment value out of. I do not have displeasure rewatching it, but as a more casual Indiana Jones fan, I think it's easier for me to look past some of the massively egregious flaws here and embrace some of the things that the movie does good. But I totally understand why some people hate it. And I'll tell you what, even as somebody that doesn't hate this movie, it's been really weird and entertaining seeing this sudden apologist defender group come out for this film. Now that Dial of Destiny is the fresh blood and is ruffling everybody's feathers, and you get these group of people on Twitter that are like, are we ready to admit that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is just as amazing as the original trilogy? No, we're not ready to admit that. Thanks for asking, though. Really quick before we move on to the top 4, well, I'm sure everybody watching is not on the lookout for Nazis or Russians or a murderous sacrificial cult in their everyday life, but you absolutely should be on the lookout for hackers and identity thieves. So protect yourself and surf the internet in safety using the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Well, as technology advances, more and bigger parts of our lives are tied to online accounts and social media profiles, leaving us wide open to the threat of identity theft more than ever before. In fact, identity theft is the fastest growing crime in this country, with a new victim nearly every 14 seconds. And that's why I'm excited today to partner with Aura, which is an easy-to-use app that has every single tool that you will need to stay safe online. Identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, VPN, password management, and even antivirus software. And while I'm sure most of you watching probably have one or even a couple of those things already, if you don't have every single one of them loaded into your arsenal, it's like locking all your doors at night and leaving your windows wide open. And by using Aura, you can even get near real-time notifications of credit inquiries in case somebody is trying to open a credit card or a personal loan using your information. The day that I activated my Aura account, I got over 50 notifications of my email address showing up on the dark web. So let Aura do the heavy lifting to keep you safe online by using my exclusive link and getting a 14-day free trial. And you will be shocked at how much of your personal information they protect just in those 14 days. So go to aura.com/Cody Leach or use this QR code to start your trial of Aura today. And thank you to Aura for sponsoring today's video. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And you know, this is a movie that I never really had too high of expectations for. And it wasn't necessarily because Kingdom of Crystal Skull just destroyed my hope for the future of this franchise, but it was because I knew at the end of the day this is going to be an 80-year-old Harrison Ford giving us an Indiana Jones film. And then, of course, you had the reveal that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas weren't coming back, and even though they got James Mangold, one of the best directors working today, there was just a lot of skepticism, a lot of uncertainty of what this movie was going to end up being. And so I walked into this just as blind and as flatlined emotions as I could be. And I had a decent enough time with it. The way that I described it was this movie is good enough. There is enough Indiana Jones magic here. There is a really good performance by Harrison Ford. There is enough nostalgia and some really well-placed Easter eggs and callbacks to the previous films without being overly reliant or heavy-handed with them. There is a fairly grounded adventure for the most part. It wasn't near as egregious and infuriating for fans and just mind-boggling as some of the things in Kingdom of Crystal Skull. And at the same time, it never came close to reaching any of the heights of the original 3 movies for me personally. So this is a movie that it just exists as a good enough place to end the franchise. A better note to end on than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but nowhere near the glory days of the original Indiana Jones films. And so if you can accept that, and if you could walk in with those expectations, then I think most people have a decent time with this film. Now, there are some issues with it. Of course, there is some really bad CGI as far as de-aging. Now, it's some of the better de-aging you're going to see, but the de-aging stuff is just nowhere near where it needs to be the forefront of a 15-20 minute sequence, because every time it focuses on Harrison Ford's face, you get pulled out of it because you know you're looking at like a cartoon version of Indiana Jones. I think that the villains were pretty weak in here, which was shocking when you have Mads Mikkelsen as the villain, because he's fucking awesome. You have Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and her character, while I warmed up to her in the last act of the film, and I'm curious how I'm going to feel about her when I rewatch the film, the first hour and 45 minutes or so, I didn't like her character at all. Just a really smug character that is talking down to Indy throughout the entire film and making a lot of ridiculous decisions that lead to a lot of really bad things happening and just no accountability whatsoever. So just a poorly written character, and it's unfortunate that you have a female in the role there, because of course the internet's just gonna have a blast with just making that the problem and not the writing of the character. And by the end of it, some decisions they made in the third act regarding the supernatural element, for me, just a little too much. A little too much for my own personal taste. And the note that they decided to end on, while certainly being sweet and sentimental, to me, it was just an alternate version of what we got in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but not as satisfying of a final note for the character as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull's wedding scene, in my opinion. So, Dial of Destiny, firmly, safely planted here in the middle of this ranking. A good enough movie. Doesn't piss me off. Doesn't get me excited. And now moving on to the top 3, and this is where we separate the men from the boys, because everybody's got some massively passionate views on which of these 3 films are the best and the worst, and this is where all the passion and the arguments and the discourse down in the comment section is probably going to be born from. So coming in at number 3 for me is going to be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, I think this is a great movie. I think it's a very entertaining movie. I think it's a lot of fun. It's probably the most humorous of all of the Indiana Jones films. I love Sean Connery in here, and the dynamic between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery is just really good chemistry, really good characters interacting with each other. Brings a little bit of a different flavor to Indiana Jones, humanizes him a bit more, gives him a little bit something more personal to fight for versus just fortune and glory. And there's some really solid action sequences in this as well, because they were still doing the shit practically. But this, to me, has always been a little too lighthearted for what I come to an Indiana Jones film for. You had Raiders of the Lost Ark that had a certain amount of darkness and violence. They ramped it up quite a bit with Temple of Doom, and then they overcorrected and went way back down here for the tone of The Last Crusade. And I just like my Indiana Jones to be a little darker, have a little bit more grit, a little bit more danger to it, and this one was a little more nerfed, in my opinion. Still a lot of fun. And I really enjoy the opening as well with River Phoenix and how that kind of frames a bit of a beginning for the character arc that goes across these 3 movies for Indiana Jones. And I like the MacGuffin item as well, the Holy Grail and what happens by the third act. It's a lot of fun. So really great movie. But of the 3, it's the one that I'm always least interested to rewatch. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, this seems to be the fan favorite from what I can tell. Now, there's a lot of passionate feelings out there, but the most popular answer that I personally see in my circles is Raiders of the Lost Ark being the best of this franchise, and most people hail it as one of the greatest films ever made, and I would totally agree with that. This is kind of a movie that set the standard and set the template for what an action-adventure movie can be and should be, and we've been measuring movies against it for the last 40 years, and pretty much none have measured up to it by most of the standards this movie has set. There are so many iconic and memorable sequences, action sequences, set pieces throughout this movie that it's ridiculous. I mean, there's like 6 or 7 different images or stunts that if you describe it to somebody, or if you show them a still image, or if you have it playing in the background, everybody recognizes it, whether they've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark or not. I mean, the opening scene with him getting the golden idol and the big boulder coming at him, I mean, that's like one of the greatest movie openers of all time. And I think the way that they characterize Indiana Jones in this first film is interesting because he's not a total clear-cut hero. Like, he's not a golden boy who does the right thing all the time and has this noble thing that he's going after, these noble reasonings and motivations to go through and fight against the Nazis. He's kind of a bit of a dick. He's a guy who's out for his own gain. He's a guy who's out for treasure and fortune and glory and notoriety, and just kind of stumbles upon this situation, and throughout the course of the film suddenly has to kind of shift his motivation from his own personal greed to, okay, I gotta stop these Nazi fucks from getting what they need. And it just leads to such an awesome action adventure that it just moves at an awesome clip. I mean, you just have no point in this movie where it ever gets boring or uninteresting. They're always trying to one-up themselves. They're always keeping that pace going with action and excitement and danger and a lot of violence in this movie, which is very easy to forget how violent this movie actually is. When you got dudes getting shot in the face and blood just pouring down, and you're like, this is PG? Great side characters too, Sala, Marion Ravenwood, and they interact with Harrison Ford and have great on-screen chemistry with him. This is basically a perfect film. There's a bit less of a payoff with Indiana Jones' character arc in this individual movie as compared to across the trilogy that sometimes I could gripe about if I really wanted to. There is certainly an argument to be made that the action sequences and the set pieces drive the pace of the movie more than the actual narrative does, but even with that, if you want to call that valid criticisms, which I would, this is a movie you can't really knock it. There's not really anything valid you could say against it. It's a perfect fucking action-adventure film, and it has stood the test of time as being what most people on this earth would call the greatest action-adventure film of all time. But my number one, despite being a fairly unpopular thing, is actually Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This was the one that I watched the most as a kid. This is the one that I look forward to rewatching the most as an adult when I go back through these films. And I actually watched it twice before I reviewed it because there have been so many people that have just been so passionate about the glaring issues of this movie and how it's easily the worst of the 3, and even seeing a lot of people post Dial of Destiny say it's still the worst of the franchise with 5 films in it. And every time I watch this movie, I try to see them. I try to see those giant glaring flaws of Temple of Doom, and I just don't see them. We can agree that Willie is a terrible character. We can agree that she is really annoying and completely grating on the nerves, especially in the first act of the film. We can agree that maybe some of the darker and nastier elements of this movie was forced shock value. We can agree on that. But stacked against all the things that this movie does fucking incredibly, that's barely a drop in the bucket of the awesomeness of Temple of Doom. I mean, look, I'm a horror fanatic, so when you have a very horror-centric adventure of Indiana Jones, that's the one that's probably going to appeal to me the most, and it always has. When you got Molaram and this psychotic sacrificial cult here that are revealed halfway through the film to be the bad guys, they're easily the most intimidating, easily the most frightening, and the most physical threatening to Indiana Jones. And you have the sacrifice of pulling the dude's heart out, and Kalima, and dropping him into the pit, and you have child slaves and fucking monkey brain desserts. I mean, this movie is batshit wild, and I like it. But beyond that, this thing moves at an incredible pace. I mean, from the moment this thing starts, it is like action sequence after action sequence after action sequence. that doesn't take too many pauses in between. You know, a little bit for development of the plot and development of the characters and transitioning from setting to setting in the middle of the film, the second act, but that first act is a mile a minute. There's some solid action in that middle act, and the third act is just balls to the wall, just fighting the giant boss that is the same guy that he fought, the same actor that he fought at the airplane in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And even Short Round gets in on the action. You've got the whole thing where they're going through the mine carts. They end up on the waterfall outside of this cliff, and then they're on the rope bridge and alligators. I mean, this just never takes a breath. And it's so exciting. Even for a movie that is 40 plus years old, it's still just grabs you by the balls and is just like, yeah, adventure, bitch. And I mentioned him, but Short Round, that's my favorite side character that we've ever had in this franchise. I love that character. I love the dynamic between him and Indy. Such a massive missed opportunity to not have that character show up for even one scene in Dial of Destiny. I just love what Ki Kwan brings to him. I mean, I loved him there. I loved him in the Goonies. And it's always this heartwarming element to where even though it's like a Batman and Robin situation, it's like what responsible adult brings a fucking minor to situations like these? I don't care. I love them being there. I buy it. I dig it. And so for all of those reasons, while this is definitely not the popular answer, have I ever cared about that? This is my honest answer. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is by far my favorite, my number one of the Indiana Jones franchise. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2023 new release reviews, and I'm also gonna put my playlist of my Indiana Jones reviews if you want my more in-depth thoughts on all these movies. Like, share, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to check out Aura in the video description below and protect yourself while surfing online. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.